everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm with a new colleague, Sharon, and we met in the groups on Facebook, and I've been trying to gather Asian professionals across the whole collective in terms of how we can talk about neurodiversity affirming practices or just even neurodiversity as a subject. I am so grateful that you commented and you are collaborative with me, and I'm so thankful that we can just share conversation and time together because I think this will help increase representation, which is something I rarely see in the spaces for neurodiversity. Um, and I know that there is so much that we can talk about, but I think we honed it down. And so I'd love you to introduce yourself and share more of what you would like to focus on today. Thank you.
Sure. First, yeah, I want to say I am so grateful that you reached out and we were able to connect. I absolutely agree that there's this need for, more of us Asian American mental health providers to connect and to give that representation and that voice. I'm just excited to be here. So thank you very much. Yeah, I figured it might be good to just give a little background about how I got into the world of psychology and what motivated me to then also, really question a lot of my formal training and adopt a neurodiversity affirming approach. Because I think that, perhaps my journey and my story might resonate with some other people. So I think, growing up, it's kind of what you might expect of a typical like immigrant experience. When we came to the US, I was 6 and I just started school and I didn't know any English. So I really just worked so hard to try to fit in, like that's part of your survival strategy when you're thrown into a new environment, right? And so I was always from the beginning kind of like observing and studying people and trying to figure out like, oh, here's how you should respond to, here are the different questions you might ask. How do you approach a friend? Or, what are the things that should be funny that you want to laugh about? And it was just so hard to keep up with it all. But I tried my best, and at that time, the whole idea was that you try to assimilate, right?
Right.
You do your best to kind of like give up a lot of elements of like your own culture to kind of adopt and really embody the new one that is the majority culture of the environment you're in. And so I did that a lot growing up, whether my parents liked it or not. And yeah, over time, they identified me as gifted. I was tested. It was kind of typical in a lot of ways, that you'd expect an Asian American immigrant family to really focus on and value education and higher education and really doing well academically. So that was my focus for a really long time. And, doing my best to kind of meet the expectations that my family had set for me. And actually, I wanted to go into the medical field. I love the idea of caring, for other people. And my parents actually dissuaded me like from, becoming a surgeon or something. They're like, oh, that is so intense and work heavy and you're never going to have time like to be with your family. And so the next thing I thought of, and I was by that time in high school, was like, well, maybe mental health would be a great way to go. And, I shouldn't have been surprised to find out that, okay, my parents did not really love that idea either. They're like, psychology, what are you going to do with that? So I really had to kind of figure out this path kind of on my own. And And it just so happened that each step of the way, I just was like, I need to keep going. I want to find out more. Being an immigrant from a really lower socioeconomic status when we were starting out, there's so many layers of how we were a minority and how we had to work really hard to get to a place in our society where we are more empowered to kind of live a life that feels really meaningful and feel like we're valued members of this society. And I think that my parents had a lot of fear that going into psychology meant that I was gonna have to fight really hard all my life, because it's not like a STEM kind of area like that they had envisioned. But anyhow, I realized over time, in looking back, that throughout my education, I was always trying to meet other people's expectations of me and like what they thought I should be doing as an Asian American, Chinese American woman, someone who's relatively hardworking and smart, but also quiet. And a lot of times when I was quiet, people just thought I was really shy. And in reality, it was just that I was working so hard all the time trying to figure out, what do people want of me and how do I do that well? Right. So there was no time to really develop a sense of like, well, what resonates and is true to who I am, as a person. I'm a gifted student. I have to fit in with, my gifted classmates and those expectations, a lot of times they did really well in school in ways that I couldn't. And it wasn't until, much later in life, in my mid 30s, I'm now in my late 30s, that I realized, wow, I'm an autistic person. I have ADHD. I was dealing with a lot of stuff, and there were lots of differences in the way I process information and function, and that contributed to the challenges I experienced in the academic world. And I just always thought, well, I just need to work harder. I just need to stay up all night more often than other people. But it makes so much more sense now to realize, oh yeah, actually the ADHD and being autistic meant that I had the ability to really hyper focus on my passions and my interests. But there were so many things you do in school, right, that aren't related to your passions. And it was so hard to like focus and complete that work. And I just couldn't understand why, and the only narrative I had gotten at that point was like, well, you're slow, you're not that smart. It was a fluke that you got into the gifted program. You're just not hardworking enough, and you're not like quick on your feet, and whatever it was, like lazy, stupid, all those like narratives was like, that shouldn't be me. And yet my behavior is matching up with those labels that people were giving me. And by people, I mean family, they're like, oh, you haven't finished your work yet? Like, how come you're so slow at this? So that narrative stuck with me for such a long time. And you can imagine, going into psychology and mental health, that's kind of like, I think a big part of why it drew me in was like, I wanted to actually know more and find answers and figure out who am I and why do people do what they do, and why are we like this? So yeah, that's what drew me into the field of psychology, and I stuck with it. I graduated with my doctorate in 2015. and I got licensed. But there were so many points where I was burning out, I was melting down, and yeah, and it was normalized, in our field, in our culture, even in the program that I was in, it was always sort of like, oh yeah, you're struggling, so are we all. That's like just normal, and I realize how toxic that is now. But at the time it was this narrative of like, oh, so and so is taking 8-9 years to finish their program. They're still not done. And it was never coming from a place of like, wait, let's look at the larger systems in place that are making it difficult for this person. And why are we hush hush talking behind their back about like if they're struggling with the coursework or whatever? It was almost like we had to be perfect. And we as mental health professionals aren't allowed to have learning differences, processing differences, neurodivergences, even though it's like very plentiful, right? All around us and in the world of mental health as professionals. So yeah, I think it wasn't until I really got out of there and started to take more time to envision, what do I want out of my life? I'm solidly in my mid-30s. And then I had a kid, and my kid was like doing all the stuff that I remember doing as a kid, like so energetic, so active, and full of ideas and creativity. And then at the same time, like really unfocused on the things he wasn't interested in and super focused on the things he loved, right? And you can imagine, I put the pieces together. I'm like, these behaviors on the outside, really meet criteria, I would say. But that means like, it comes from me. It's genetic, it's hereditary. So that's when I, started to kind of think more about this. And then at the same time, I think what was pivotal was I have a lovely friend I've known since 6th grade who at that time was really figuring out her neurodivergences and got diagnosed and was like, Sharon, we're best friends. If I'm, autistic and whatever, like, don't you think that maybe you are too? And that's when it really hit me. It was like, this is worth looking into. And it just challenged all of the narratives that I had, that had been ingrained in me from the beginning and throughout my education, that like people with these types of differences they're the other, they're different, they're the people we assess and like see how miserable they are and how much they're struggling and suffering and unable to do this or that. It was all from such a deficit based model that it was so hard, even throughout all my training, to see myself described in the DSM. And, I think self-identification is so valid. It's more important than I think having a professional rate you and score you. But I did, just for my own learning and discovery, I did get officially evaluated and diagnosed as well. So that's been part of my journey. And now I'm in a place of like, I actually love my work even more because I feel like I'm actually able to help people in understanding themselves in a way that really makes sense and is uplifting and affirming and validating, instead of labeling and continuing to enforce that narrative. There's something wrong with you, you're disordered, right? That you're crazy, essentially. And that's just something I work every day, like with my clients and through the work that I do, to kind of dispel, because that message, unfortunately, is all around us. And especially in the Asian American communities, it's so important to save face and to look a certain way and present a certain way, and to not really address the elephant in the room. Yeah, so I think that all of that is connected. And I don't want to, get too far off course. So I'm just gonna check in with you now to see if there's anything else I should talk about.
Well, I'll just kind of echo on some of the points that you talked about. There's a lot. So I'll go back way to the beginning. I think that's something that us as Asian Americans, so you touched about having to assimilate, right? I think that's something that is like erases us even sometimes as a minority or as a marginalized group because we blend in or we disappear. We literally cut off parts of our identity to fit in. And so we don't always know who we are. Like we're blending in, we want to survive. It's completely a survival mechanism based on our heritage, historical, anything that comes from us that we inherit, we take with us. And culturally, the collective is like, you don't stand out. And so if you don't stand out, you look at what the majority culture is asking us for, which is suppressing any personal need. So when we do that, I think most Asian Americans have it's like a journey. The moment you wake up and realize I've disappeared into this muck of greater culture, who the heck am I? That's like when the journey really does start for us. Other people, I think, since they're more individualized, they're like they already know parts of who they are, sharing their story, very loudly proclaiming who they are. But I think as Asian Americans, when we start naming something, it's like a rebirthing because we've never done it before. I think it's not a comparison, but I think it's very difficult to step out of it because it's so new. It's so different.
That's such a powerful message. I got chills just listening to you talk about that. And I was thinking too to how, you know, this method of survival, it's written in our DNA because, my family grew up in a time of famine and the Cultural Revolution. And, we left after the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Oh wow.
Right. So, my family made that decision to come to the US after what happened. And, you can think about the level of fear and trauma growing up in that environment can do to you. So I think this idea of like flying under the radar and surviving and being quiet and just doing your work and let that work speak for you, and just be good, whatever that means you don't make waves and you don't stand up because the person who stands up will get, what is it they say, like hammered down, right? Like and so I really adopted all of that without even questioning it. It was just a way of life. And so it is, like you said, it's a huge revolution to come to the place of like discovering yourself and thinking about, well, who am I beyond just surviving and trying to fit in and be unnoticed. And even in speaking today, it just hit me that like for the first time in my life, I'm at a point where I feel like there is something I can talk about that is like coming from me and is, my experience and my opinion. And it's actually, something that I do want to speak about and not just be quiet and blend in.
I love that because, again, culturally, sometimes when we become too much of our own person, it's perceived as you are standing out too much from the collective again. You're bragging in some way. We don't do that. We don't brag. We're humble. We keep quiet about our things. Like, so it's like, why are you talking about being different here? It's like, so it gets more complicated. There's all this internal messaging and arguing about like what's my intention for doing this? Am I standing out too much? Am I attention seeking? So like all these things are happening, and the story is so important. I know there's a wave of all these books being written right now for either just trauma, mental health, in terms of Asian writers doing something else. I think that is for me. It's just like I graduated with an art degree, and so like I always laugh about that because it's been a constant joke. It's like, what are you gonna do with this freaking degree? Like you'll never use it, kind of thing. But it, like you said, what's the part of my story that I get to claim and share? It's something that we are on autopilot all the time, and we don't really question or choose because survival, and it's not dutiful to do that. Like we're not benefiting our group when we focus on us, and that's so hard. Like, and so I just want to give people who are, if you made it to this point of the video, you have permission to think about yourself. Like that's the toxic message. I use the word toxic. It is healthy to think about yourself. If you know yourself more, you can benefit your group, your family, way in a more unique, individualized, stronger way. Because you're not a cookie cutter version of something else, but we tend to think we have to be, right? Like you mentioned, like you would just assimilate. So you're adopting traits of what you see around you. But then if we don't see ourselves in these spaces, we'll never know what it looks like to be healed, to have a voice, to speak up, to even just question certain things. And so you can always come back and watch this video. Just watch us talk about ourselves. You have permission to do the same thing.
That's exactly right. I've been giving myself permission to unmask more, to, mold my life in a way that I think fits me better, and that's so freeing and so amazing to be able to validate yourself. It feels like now my life is more congruent.
Mhm.
And in the past, like in my training, it's like a lot of, contingency management, behavior shaping, cognitive behavioral,
Ew.
right?
That
And
sounds
I'm just
gross.
like, I can go to the gym, I can eat well, and I can, work on getting more sleep. But if we're still masking, and that includes my autistic identity being an ADHD, or, all it's not authentic, living, right? And I remember now, like, oh, coming out of a lot of social interactions and different places where I may not have felt safe to be myself, and coming out of that feeling so drained and so dysregulated to the point of shutting down,
Mm.
and wondering what the heck is wrong with me, because that narrative at the time was like, well, this is what people do, this is how you do things, and if you're struggling, that's your problem, right? And so to break free from that, and to mold my life in a way that is more congruent and authentic, it feels really lovely. And I want to invite people to do that because it's been wonderful for me. And also, my family has embraced it. My
Mm.
parents, who are like, what the heck are you doing with psychology? And being like, oh, working with disordered people, you're just gonna become one of them. And the funny thing is like, I have a new concept and understanding of what that actually is and what that means. And yeah, I am one of the neurodivergent
Mm.
folks. And so, are a lot of people in our family. And to give that message in a way that resonates
Mm.
with them, my parents feel validated and understood too. They're like, oh, that's why I do this or do that.
Ah.
And it's been so lovely that we can all kind of unmask collectively and just be ourselves.
Mm. I want to repeat some things too about the system. I know that sometimes in neurodiversity affirming approaches, or even providers, we talk about this like it's a game set up with certain rules. The system is sets most people up to fail if we don't have a certain type of trait or neurotype, right? And so for those of us who are neurodivergent, those of us who have like sensitive nervous systems, it's not made for us. And so for those of us seeking to become helpers, this is just, again, this is my opinion. You can seek a professional opinion or challenge it. You don't have to agree. But this is my opinion, helping people trying to survive the system that they're in, trying to get the degree to do the work or whatever it is, just finish the program. Like, you can challenge everything later. It was the hardest fight to finish and see people who were struggling, either not supported, like having mental health problems in a mental health program for me was like wild. It made me feel like this is so fucked up. The system is just like broken beyond repair right now. But if you want to help, push through and or find systems that are more updated, more more progressive in some way where they honor different learning styles. But in reality, if you can just fight on to get the degree, we can come back with a collective ready to change it. You cannot fight something sometimes from the inside out. But what I do is I go into the system to learn what's going on so I can come back and be an advocate for how the system should change because I know what was happening, right? We can't help unless we know what's going on, and so that's what we can do to reframe all the terrible stuff that we saw.
That's exactly right. I'm so glad you mentioned that because it it really is so large, the systems of oppression, right? That you can only do so much, it could bury you. And
Mm-hmm.
I think if I know what I know now and had to go through grad school, it would be a completely different experience, right? And it would be crushing a dish on top of everything else to always be confronted with this idea of like, is this, the thing that I need to speak up about? Is this something that's just so soul crushing and demoralizing that I do have to put in that fight, right? And actually, I remember now that, classmates who had their differences or were from different backgrounds, when they spoke up, it was a fight, and I think, again, those systems of oppression, it teaches you, like, this is what happens to you if you try to fight back.
Right.
Like, you're going to encounter so much more difficulty. You're going to, and so it's so hard. You end up having to decide, how do you survive and get through this so you can be in a position to help and make that difference. And I think I lucked out a little bit, just that I was so unaware, going through that program. I was so focused on just hiding and blending in. And that just goes to show what an unsafe space, it actually was, for people to discover more and be themselves.
Jeez. It's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that we're talking about it because, like, people don't have to agree with the way we do things, but we're at least doing a lot of things of, again, the nuance in between all this stuff. Like, we don't live in a black and white world. Like, in this system that we're in, we all graduate at different times, different programs that we're in. We see certain things and we have to make choices, like I did try to speak up for certain things. Nothing happened, right? But there's these opportunities for us to either you could seek advocates to help you at the same time, we're playing this game again. It's a game. What does your degree do to offer leverage or some type of like additional power? It's about power right now. When we come from a marginalized group, we don't have much power. So we're playing this game of titles, degrees. So we're trying to scoop them up and get them too, or at least learn something, like I am a coach now. I don't practice therapy at the same time. Like I am, well versed in the field because I did practice for a while and I chose to continue in this path because there's different ways to help. I think that sometimes there's this hubris of like looking down on different professionals, like student, professor. The power differential is so real. And so you have to figure out, do I feel empowered enough to speak up against an entire institution? Or, like most Asians do, can we lay low and survive? And for some of us who choose to come back and fight, we can. I'm not saying we all have to fight. It's not always something we have to do. But if you can survive, I think it's a win for all of us.
Absolutely. And I just feel like this is a space, I'm so glad that you provide, the opportunity for us to talk about these things and to connect in this way. And hopefully, yeah, get others to kind of think about, wow, like this really resonates with my own experience, actually. Because I think it would have been so valuable for doctoral student Sharon to have seen something like this. Would have been really amazing. um yeah, I would love for there to be, and I do see some glimmers of hope that there is a push towards more neurodiversity affirming education and overall in the field of psychology, but we have such a long way to go. And I think this is an important part of that work toward that progress towards that vision. Yeah, I think if we come out of our education kind of really embodying that learning that people are disordered, and that we're the professional and the expert here to kind of label you and give you the treatment plan because you're disordered, that unfortunately is just part of that larger system of oppression, right? That's taking away power from people who are in the minority because of their neurodivergences or whatnot. So yeah, I do feel like we're right now part of something to fight against that.
So I again, repeating of what you're saying again. So what we're doing here is, because the system is effed up, it's so deficit based. It's hard to redo the whole system. Like, there's insurance, there's medical systems, there's like all these books and then old ways of thinking and all these masters of the craft perpetuating. So like, it's constantly fighting new information against a sea of old information, right?
Yeah.
It's a Goliath. And so we are constantly trying to make waves. And this is how we do it. We speak up. We make the videos. We comment. We use the algorithm. The internet is a tool, but sometimes we're watching TikTok videos, So like, it's all that we choose to do in small ways that can make things bigger. Because like, most of the old school ways of thinking, they're in books, you know. There's with people who lecture and stuff like that. But we have access to technology now, and so we actually have like, it's our kryptonite to take down Superman. Anyway, so like, no, it's not. They're not Superman. We are Superman. Um, we have a way to spread the message like fire, but again, when people perpetuate the negativity, it's because we feel like there's something wrong with us. So people are out there looking for help, and they're researching, they're Googling things, and they look at the first hits on Google, right? And so like, this is something I guess we can ask the viewers or people who are interested in the subject to help us, get more hits. Like, just comment in the video, comment anything. I don't care. Just like the video, share it. Like, the algorithm is based on comments and interaction. There's ratio of what happens. And so like, if we can have more people just be like, oh, that was interesting, or thanks for the video, I don't care what you write, just write anything. It helps us see that there is meaning here. We could talk about every other group that I can find access to talk about their experiences in education and mental health, because it's there. I have, I don't know how long I've been practicing, but in education, 10 years, and then in mental health, 10 years. So like, there's this space for people who feel like their voice has never been even acknowledged. And it's so disappointing to constantly see this, because like, I feel like I'm getting older and I don't want to see this anymore. And so like, us in our own way, again, I don't force anyone, it's not authentic, like you said, to speak up in a way that doesn't feel right. And so for us, I can, you can tell when you watch this video, both of us are pretty gentle people. We have our own way of communicating and our own energy. There is a strength in sharing and speaking in our way, and we all need different forms of speaking and communicating wholeness and truth, right? And so, however you choose to do it, do it. You can always just practice and figure it out. That's like, I always talk about personality like hats. Put on the hat, take it off if you don't think it feels right. Like, it might be something you want to put on for now, practice speaking that way. You know, like that's why we're here. We're here to just offer the just the opportunity. Like this form of existence could be valid for you too. You know, you never know unless you try.
That's exactly right. Yes. I think it was so affirming, before this video, I was like expressing my concern, right? Oh, I have a slower cadence and, I kind of can be long-winded and I get lost in my thoughts, and it's like, again, that narrative, that's drilled into me, like, well, if you're going to speak and speak publicly, this is the way you have to look, and it needs to be polished and rehearsed and all of these things, that I was just like, this is getting a little overwhelming to kind of meet those expectations. And it was so lovely that you kind of like helped me take a step back and be like, whoa, the way we, process and communicate is completely valid. There's no one right way to do it, right? And so I I love that, we're really doing what is genuine and authentic for us. So I love that.
Yes. Oh, you share so many wonderful, wonderful gifts to the community, and I can't wait to listen to the conversation again. Um, how can people find or learn more about you?
Um, that's a great question. I do have a very small online, like I have a website that's basically my clinic's website. Um, but I haven't actually created anything beyond that. Again, it kind of goes along with this idea of like flying under the radar, right? And I'm just now, in talking with you, kind of dipping my toes in the water of like, no, you can be yourself. It's safe to come out, right? So, but people are always welcome to reach me by my email too. I prefer and like to have, that kind of intimate connection and relationship. If anyone felt drawn to kind of reach out to me, I'm more than happy, to receive those messages. So I can give you my email address for people to use.
That would be great. Could you say it out loud too so people could hear it?
Sure. It's actually my full name, Sharon Xie, so SharonXiephd @gmail.com.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with the community before we go?
Um, can't think of anything off the top of my head. It's just that, you know, whoever's out there and listening, you're valid in the way that you are. And honestly, I'm really like, knowing the mental health field, it's like, I would encourage you, to question when you have any kind of negative or unaffirming experience with that. And when you encounter other professionals, to really think about how that has more to do with that larger system of oppression than something inherently wrong with you. So I feel that that's so important, for me to remember and know. And you can probably tell I have a lot of like trauma from having been part of that system so much without even realizing it. So I'm kind of making this blanket apology of like, please don't take that as like, as informative of like who you are and how you need to operate in life. Like I think, when you receive messages of that really resonate with your soul and affirm, your place in the world, like that's what's actually healing. And that's what the mental health profession should be about. So I think that's just my quick takeaway off the top of my head.
It's a great takeaway. And I'm going to actually compare it to coming out of a really abusive relationship. So you kind of don't really see it. You have a feeling, but unless you separate and then like years or even time, just time to kind of be yourself without the abuse, then it clicks like it's so abusive. It was so harmful. you know, because your self-worth goes down into the trash can when you're in something that takes away your power like that. It we have so much hope and idealism when we go into the field, and it really does burst our bubble. Like, and then you have to really heal from trauma to really um to be your own person to help in a way that actually helps. It's that's all. That's what I'm gonna say. I'm not gonna like start bashing right now because we're wrapping the video, but just saying that we both get it. We get what people have to go through. It's and we're trying. So like there's some people who are making their own programs, certification programs, you know, just speaking on this, and it's really needed. At the same time, I don't blame anyone for needing to seek degree programs or certifications in systems that are like the way they are. We know what it brings to the table. We know that it can be very harmful. So we need you to remember to protect yourself. That it is not about you at all.
Mhm.
Yeah. But yeah, email Sharon. Sharon's awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there's just so much that we could further explore about all of this that I'm not going to continue because otherwise it would just go on forever. But thank you just so much for the opportunity in this space to even broach this subject and share it with others. Yeah.
No, I appreciate your transparency and vulnerability and authenticness because that's what we need. We don't need hoity-toity psychologists in the space who keep on perpetuating power dynamics like that. Like you're so gentle, genuine, and soft. And again, it's a real way to be a professional helper. Like we need that. And so I will help uplift you and help blast you into different groups so we can see that there's different ways to do this and that we can offer each other support and voice. Like we can speak, so can you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Booney.
Mm-hmm. Well, take care and thank you for watching, everybody.